I'd never given much thought to how I would die, but being hunted by an ancient vampiric spirit wasn't exactly what I had in mind. In ancient Greece, strange things lurked in the shadows. Some said they were just myths, stories told to scare people, but then I met her.
Something older and more powerful.
She lives beyond the grace of God. In the outer darkness, she's Vampyr, Nosferatu.
Thank you, I never drink wine.
I am a vampire.
Vampires. 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 When most of us hear of vampires today, we think sharp fangs or sparkly twinks or Dracula. You know, the kind of guy that shows up with a cape saying, "I want to suck your blood," and vanishes in a puff of smoke. But did you know that ancient Greece had its own legends of terrifying, chilling bloodsuckers? Today we are diving deep into ancient Greek vampires. Creatures like the Empusa, the Lamia, and the Striges or the Strix that haunted everyday ancient Greek life. The concept of vampires as fanged, nocturnal creatures is relatively new in their development, a product of the medieval period. But the ancient world, particularly the ancient Mediterranean, had its own variety of nighttime blood-sucking spirits. Among them were what today would be considered revenants, shapeshifters that would seduce and then consume their victims. Ethereal undead women, honestly, my type. Women who return to the living world after a tragic death, often with unfulfilled desires or a thirst for revenge. You see, ancient Greek tales of these revenants of what could be considered early vampires were more of spirits returning from the dead, reanimating the corpses which they left behind, coming back as sort of what you could consider even zombies, but with a mind. In fact, in ancient Greece, they were often referred to as ghosts or phantasms. They were the undead, beings who returned to their physical bodies, bearing a deceptive beauty. One such story is that of a young woman named Philonenon. Philonenon was a young unwed woman who died before marriage. Philonenon returned from the dead in order to consort with her love that she had had in life, a man named Machates. In the dead of night, she would visit him while his parents were asleep in his family's home. Women who would sneak in through the windows, spirits, in the middle of the night, driving men mad, and ultimately consuming them. These two secret lovers, forbidden from one another, would enjoy nights of wild passion together. That is, until one night Machate's mother walked in on them. That must have been extremely awkward is all I'm saying. I don't know, your undead girlfriend and your mother catches you? When his mother walked in on Machates with Philonenon, the girl who was supposed to be dead, Philonenon collapsed back into death's grasp, returning to her former state as a corpse, revealing her true nature as a revenant to the horrified family. And likely Machates, because I don't think that dude knew that she was, like, dead. Hopefully. Hopefully. I mean, This tale of Philonenon is set in the 4th century in the Macedonian court of King Philip, the father of Alexander the Great. Or maybe the Alexander not so great. These details were preserved in stories told by the historian Phlegon of Tralles, although he notes that the story itself predates this period. Philonenon's ghostly apparitions, nocturnal visits, were described very similarly as the legend of the Lamia, ghostly women known for craving blood and targeting the young and vulnerable, particularly men. To the ancient Greeks and to the ancient world overall, ghosts like Philonenon were believed to hunger for more than just companionship. They craved the very life essence of the living. Ooh, spooky. Her rendezvous with Machates, although not overly violent, hinted of a darker fate in store for him, for to sleep with the dead, and to become the dead. Had her visits continued, she would have ultimately drained him of life itself, consuming his blood to sustain her undead state, his vital life force. Stories like these shaped early foundations for later vampire myths. and how we understand these creatures in popular legends and folklore today. Later, as Christianity spread through Greece, the term vrikolikos emerged to describe these vampiric ghosts, acknowledging them as revenants who cross the boundaries between life and death. But why did Philoninon come back from the dead? What was her unfinished business? Well, in ancient Greece, marriage could be considered an unfinished business. She was a young woman who hadn't been married. And honestly, they were kind of a patriarchal society in the later periods. Marriage was super important, especially for women. It was expected for you to start a family. Marriage held immense cultural significance in ancient Greece, serving as a cornerstone for societal structure and family continuity. It was not just a personal or romantic choice. Marriage was a duty to your community, to your family, and to even the gods. Marriage was often linked to the preservation of lineage, inheritance of property, and honor to the family. Women in particular, again, were expected to marry and have children in order to continue their family's line. It was a role that they played in society, whether they wanted to or not. Dying before marriage was considered a tragic death because it meant these women did not fulfill their expected roles in society, and thus they died with these unfulfilled desires. Philoneon's return from the grave can be seen as a way to fulfill, albeit in a twisted way, those desires that were denied to her in life. By seeking out a romantic connection with her former lovers Makates after death, she defies the limitations placed on her by an untimely end, reclaiming that role that was supposed to be hers. In this way, Philenon's nightly visits to Makates serves as a symbolic reclamation of those life experiences that she never got to have. Philenon's return from the dead embodies societal fears about unfulfilled desires and unfulfilled duties, with her family and friends regarding her return as a threat to the societal order and to life itself.
Наталья Варлей и Леонид Куравлев. Ведьма! Ей-богу, ведьма!
It is interesting to note that the very idea of the dead returning back to life due to unresolved issues goes back thousands of years. In fact, we see a rise in stories like these after traditions of giving offerings of food and drink to ancestors begins to die out with the rise of Christianity. See, in ancient society, particularly in Egypt and Greece, the dead were believed to require certain rites of food and offerings in order to survive in the next life. When these needs were neglected, often due to familial oversight, a lack of proper burial, or forgotten rites, the deceased could become restless, one of the restless dead rising from their graves in order to seek what they need, rising from their graves with hunger and longing. Again, these fears only intensified once traditional practices started to die out with the rise of monotheism and particularly that of Christianity. Previously, it was customary to leave offerings for deceased loved ones, ensuring that they had nourishment and sustenance and care in the afterlife. However, as Christianity took hold, these rites became seen as something more and more pagan, something evil, or something to be avoided. With these traditions dying out, people's fears about their loved ones suffering in the afterlife and having to return from the dead began to rise. These anxieties manifested in the idea and the fear of revenants, of vampires, of ghouls, of ghosts, coming back from the dead not out of a form of malice, but out of a form of desperation and of hunger. These tales became a way for people to wrestle with their guilt surrounding abandoning traditional ancestral practices, as well as the fear of abandoning their loved ones after death. In a way, the proliferation of these tales with the rise of Christianity reflects a wider societal guilt, a literal haunting awareness that leaving one's loved ones unattended after death may force them to return. And while the tale of Philomenon can be classified technically as a ghost story, it is a great example of early revenant-like, vampire-like tales, particularly due to her physical return to her body and her feeding on Makates. Of course, we have many more ancient sources for what could be considered ancient vampires in the wider ancient world, but particularly in ancient Greece, from writers such as Eusebius, Phlegon of Tralles, Philostratus, and more. Here, one passage from the late 4th century, or the late Hellenic period of ancient Greece, tells us of a journey from Persia to where the man Apollodorus ran into an Empusa, another example of what could be considered an ancient Greek vampire. Said to be a female shape-shifting being that would seduce and then devour men, particularly travelers.
You're killing people. No, I'm killing boys. Boys are just placeholders. They come and they go.
Quote, "These creatures could be very frightened off with mockery. The Empusa, a vampire that Apollonius encountered on the road, was said to be driven away simply by laughing." This is an interesting take on how to get rid of these spirits, because it's not always steaks and garlic, but sometimes you just gotta laugh at them. Just laugh at them. They'll go away. It makes me wonder if they feel embarrassment. The Empusa was said to be a terrifying phantasm, defined in the work The Sudas by Crates of Malice as a demonic phantasm with shape-shifting abilities. In Aristophanes' plays, she's said to be able to change various appearances from beasts to a woman. By late antiquity, or the last period of ancient Greece, Empusa was considered less of a singular woman and more of a classification of spirits, one that would seduce and also consume men for food. It was said that the Empusa was either born of or served Hecate, the goddess of the restless dead, of sorcery and of necromancy. It was said that the Empusa had one defining trait, a leg made of bronze, which you could hear coming. In this way, she was described sometimes as being donkey-footed. You know that man, Apollodorus, depending on who you ask, who ran into the Empusa at the crossroads? Well, he was said to have had a student at one point that also ran into one and almost fell prey to being devoured by her. The story goes that he met her at a symposium, at a gathering of students, and he immediately fell head over heels in love with her. She took him back to her grand mansion, where she let him feast and enjoy the night together. They were to be wed the very next day, and as he was telling his teacher Apollonius this, Apollonius started to think, oh no, sounds a lot like the woman I ran into. But after their wedding, her grand mansion fell to ruins. The illusions that she had cast were completely shattered, and he was about to be devoured, but rescued by his teacher, who had kind of guessed something was fucking suspicious. He was really fucking lucky that his teacher cared about him that much, because honestly, I probably would have thought I was too paranoid. Apollonius was a real one for that, because he could have just let his student learn the lesson the hard way. So the lesson here is, if you meet a beautiful woman after class and she brings you back to her mansion and then tells you you're getting married that very night, maybe fucking run the other direction, because there's something up. Of course, the Empusa was not the only vampire of ancient Greece. There's also the Lamia, a once beautiful queen of Libya who, according to myth, was cursed by the goddess Hera after becoming beloved by Zeus. It's always Zeus, isn't it? I mean, I love Zeus, don't get me wrong, but always goes back to him. Stricken with grief and madness, Lamia was transformed into a monstrous creature that would devour children, drinking their blood. As a rendezvous with Zeus, she cursed Lamia to be transformed into this hideous, blood-sucking monster and killed her children. This is why the Lamia went after other children to try to reclaim what she lost. Ancient Greeks saw the Lamia as a vampiric figure who consumed the young, quite similar to the Lilitu of Mesopotamia, or Lamashtu, the baby eater. Lamashtu was a monster herself, born of the gods, created to destroy and devour humanity, who the gods believed had become too rowdy and too populated. Lamashtu's curse is very similar to the Lamia's in the aspect that she too wants children very badly, and every time she tries to take children in the middle of the night and tries to nurse them, her poisonous milk ends up killing them instead. In Aristophanes' comedy piece, the playwright refers to Lamia as a symbol of horror, reflecting her status as a feared predator. And Diodorus of Sicily wrote, "Lamia was a spirit that haunted young men, luring them with her beauty only to consume their life force." Some texts also suggest that Lamia's curse made her unable to close her eyes, forcing her to witness the horrors she inflicted, adding a tragic layer to her monstrous nature. To escape this torment, she would transform herself to appear as a desirable woman, luring unsuspecting men into her clutches. Like the Empusa, her primary weapon was that of seduction. Seduction overall seems to be the common trait, and being a woman, between all of these creatures.
Kiss me and caress me, my darling husband.
This moves us to the next section, the winged bloodsuckers, the striges, or the strix. For this, I would be calling them by their ancient Greek name, the Strix, but Striges is actually where we get the term strigoi from, that is still used to refer to Romanian witches today. But originally, the Strix referred to creatures with an insatiable thirst for blood, owl-like creatures with haunting eyes, watching from the shadows. Often, they were said to be monstrous in appearance and could shapeshift at will, another telltale trait of these types of creatures. Strix were thought to drain the blood and essence of those they attacked, often targeting vulnerable people like infants. So how did the ancient Greeks protect themselves from these vampires, unlike modern vampire hunters with crucifixes and, I didn't have a stake, so I used a mace, okay? Apophatric magic was used a lot by the ancient Greeks. They would write things on doorways. They would hang cloves of garlic by their doors to ward off these nighttime nocturnal spirits from their homes. And that's actually where we get the idea today that vampires are warded away by garlic, is from ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, bodies that were feared to possibly end up coming back from the dead were either pinned down or locked away, stopping them from returning from the dead, physically restraining them. Sometimes coins would be placed in their mouths in hopes that they would pay the ferryman Chiron to pass over the river Styx. It was believed that when these creatures rose from the dead, the scythe would, chop off their heads. Instantly lose their head. We see an example of this in Bram Stoker's Dracula, where Lucy is buried and then decapitated after death. There are a couple of differences between ancient Greek vampires and modern day vampires, of course. Modern day vampires are very well known for not really walking about during daylight hours, whereas ancient Greek vampires, while they were more nocturnal spirits, didn't necessarily burn to a crisp in the sun. Generally, they only appeared in the nocturnal hours because the nocturnal hours were a liminal space, a space between one world and the next. It would be a time for these creatures that existed in an in-between state, like restless dead, like ghosts, to come back to life and to haunt the living. That's why we see in many cultures a lot of dangerous spirits come back mainly during the nighttime hours. It was kind of when the veil between this world and the next was a lot thinner. Now, while the Lamia, the Empusa, and the Strix didn't exactly have sparkling skin or a movie franchise based off of them, they did lay the foundation, the groundwork for the modern conceptualization of the seductive spirit of the vampire that we know them as today. Vampires have evolved through the ages, but these legends remind us of an older, a more ancient terror, one rooted in the restless spirits of the undead. These beings, whose lives were often cut tragically short, rise from the grave with a new purpose, bound to the world that they left behind by threads of unrequited love, unfulfilled desires, and denial of burial or justice. They return not only to haunt, but to seek what was stolen or denied to them. So the next time you hear a tale of vampires, remember, not all of them are Twilight-esque. They are creatures not only born of blood, but of longing, dating back thousands of years before Dracula, through the very annals of time to the beginning of human civilization, to the shadows of mythology where the dead would walk among the living, trying to find solace that even death itself could not grant. Hey, if you liked this, make sure you follow and subscribe, because we're going to be doing way more historic deep dives on really creepy occult, magic, sorcery, mythology. A couple of the next videos are going to be discussing the ancient Greek and Egyptian underworld, the Duat, and what to expect in the underworld, as well as the Mesopotamian origins of Lilith. Stay spooky! And look, I know it's been a while since I've uploaded a video. I've had a crazy busy year, and my editors have been like crazy busy themselves. So I had to get this. My bad. It's gonna go in the blooper reel. Whose life ended too soon, but death did not keep her back from fulfilling those desires. Can you? No, I have to redo that now. I prematurely before our marriage. Philonenon was a young unwed woman who died before marriage. In this way, Philonon's nightly visits to Makate. But what is an Empusa? Oh god, that's starting to burn me. I got hot wax on me, guys. I'm trying not to scream, but that actually did hurt. It got like all over my leg.